Today is the eve of the State of the Union as President Trump will address the American public. And you can watch it right here on LiveNOW from Fox starting tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. The State of the Union will have full coverage here throughout the evening hours and lots of conversation of what he might say around tariffs, around the midterms, about Iran. Let's be joined right now here by AP national politics reporter, friend of the program, Meg Kinnard. Meg, thanks so much for joining us. He talked about the fact the economy will be really at the heart of this speech to the American public. What do we expect to hear tomorrow?
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Andy, and that's absolutely right. That's certainly what the experts that we're talking to, longtime State of the Union analysts, I can't get that word out today, but that's definitely what they're expecting, is hearing a lot about the economy. This, of course, is coming just days after that ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court about President Trump's tariff policies, his comments and new rollouts in reaction to that with different tariff policies. But that's just one piece of the economy. The president, even in comments since that Supreme Court ruling, has been speaking several times about other topics, but always bringing in things that he has argued he has used to benefit everyday Americans. He talked about gas prices just earlier today and some other measures that he would argue show that he has the country on the right track economically. So I would imagine we are going to hear some of that big picture foreign relations economics when it comes to tariffs, but also the argument from the Trump administration as to how they are working and gaining success for everyday Americans here at home.
And we've seen President Trump seemingly already on the campaign trail in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, obviously key states there that he won to get back into the White House. How much will this be a stump speech of sorts from Trump?
Certainly, it is an election year after all. And even though President Trump isn't on the ballot, a lot of the candidates for whom he's advocating and the ones he would like to keep his party in control of the House and Senate will be. And so there's always politics underneath everything. But this will be an opportunity for the president to make those arguments. And then for those Republican candidates on the ballot to then take that into their districts in places where, if President Trump has support in their district, then to align themselves and say, yes, this is what he said during his State of the Union. I support these policies. This is why you should support me. And by transitive property, support him. So you're absolutely right. Again, this is not an election year for the president, but it's a pivotal election year for his party. And with this State of the Union, this really is going to be one of those pieces that kind of, at least for the administration, kicks off the argument that they will be making and that the president and vice president will be making to the American people as we see them out on the stump. Sure, they're probably going to roll other meetings into a lot of these visits. When the president was in Georgia last week, we saw him taking a factory tour, but also talking a lot of politics and bringing a lot of Georgia candidates up on stage with him. We're going to be seeing that play out all across the country, and it will serve two purposes. One, to argue for congressional Republicans who will be on the ballot, but also as a way for President Trump to continue bringing his own message out into America and probably crowd testing a lot of ideas. All of the campaign rallies that we've covered through the years, when it was candidate Trump, then President Trump, former President Trump, all the different iterations, we've often seen those as opportunities for him, if he has a new idea or a thought, to really just get it out in front of a crowd, test it, see what lands, what gets a lot of applause. If it gets a lot of reaction in a good way, we'll be hearing it a lot more.
Yeah, and he always touts his success, but he also talks about his predecessor as well. During that first joint address to Congress last year, not the State of the Union, he talked about it, saying he, quote, inherited a mess. He invoked President Biden's name 13 times. Do you think he will lean on that again?
Absolutely. That is certainly one of the things we are expecting. We've been hearing it, too, from the president in a couple of recent remarks that he's been giving, talking about his own successes, but then reminding the people to whom he's speaking, I inherited a mess from Joe Biden. That's the way he phrases it over and over. And so particularly on the economy, particularly on immigration, two of the biggest things that President Trump talks about most frequently, I would imagine, those are areas where he's always quick to point out what the situation was when he was elected back into the White House and characterizing the 4 years that preceded that under President Joe Biden. So it is with a certainty, I would bet, that we will be hearing Joe Biden again tomorrow night. I don't know exactly how many times, but I bet it'll be a few.
The lucky number 13, you have to maybe bet over and under on exactly how many times that will be said tomorrow. There's always stuff around it. There are always guests that are involved in the State of the Union. Do we have any insight onto who President Trump has invited, what some of the auxiliary people might be there?
Well, we do know that he has recently invited the two American gold medal winning hockey teams from the most recent Olympics that just wrapped up. And there is a bit of a scramble happening now in the Capitol to try to find seating if all of those players do choose to show up. The president, by invitation of the speaker, comes to give this address and is allotted a certain number of special guest spots. We will be hearing more about those probably throughout the day tomorrow. That's usually when a lot of that information comes out. But when it comes to the U.S. men's and women's Olympic hockey teams, that has certainly set off all of those who are doing those seating arrangements of trying to find how do we get another couple dozen seats in a gallery that's already slammed full and seats are spoken for. So that will be very interesting. But it always is of note when the president does invite guests, in this part, probably a point of patriotism, but also oftentimes people who are aligned with different pieces of the speech, different issues he's going to be talking about. And so I would imagine we'll be seeing that too, but right now it is a scramble for space at this point.
Yeah, I think we heard Matthew Tkachuk saying he's heading to Washington, D.C., so at least a smattering potentially of hockey players there will be in the audience. I do want to ask you about, because obviously President Trump, the showman in every regard, last time during his first term, he talked about the reuniting of several American families. We saw the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Rush Limbaugh. Are we expecting any grand gestures like that?
There always could be. There is a lot of speculation around what could be that big moment, because if President Trump has done one thing with the State of the Union, it's certainly to make it his own. Remember, this started off as a pretty procedural thing that the president would come in front of a joint session of Congress and just kind of give an update as to how the last year went. Thomas Jefferson, when he was president, even did it in written form, didn't really come and give remarks. And so it's kind of evolved through the years. But for President Donald Trump, it's certainly, he likes those big moments. We know that from watching him this past decade plus. And so I would imagine that there is at least something formulated into that for tomorrow.
All right, very good in terms of that. We also know that the kind of counterbalance, the Democrat response will be coming from Abigail Spanberger. But what do we expect to hear from Democrats? Because we know some Dem leaders saying that you should show up and maybe not be silent in that way, or don't show it up at all. What is the Democrats' game plan? What do we expect to see from them, if anything?
What we've heard from Hakeem Jeffries is to tell his members, respect decorum, please. If you don't want to come, that's fine, but please no shouting, no giving remarks out of turn, so to speak. But there are two counter-programming events, at least, set up by Democrats happening just before State of the Union or during it. And we do expect there to be some members who opt to maybe go to one of those instead of attending the president's address, or maybe just stay home in general. But at least from the leadership, they don't want this to be a moment where there's shouting, there's ejections like we saw during the last joint address from Congressman Green from Texas. So they're hoping for a bit of a calmer reaction from their members. But you're right, we will hear from Abigail Spanberger in that official response. And that will, at least after the speech, they'll be looking to set the tone with the way that she's going to counterbalance some of what Donald Trump says in his speech.
Yeah, foreshadowing for the midterms to come. And as we talk about it, we'll see the over-under on Biden being named maybe 13 times. Also about the timing from one of your colleagues there at the Associated Press, saying tomorrow's State of the Union, quote, it's going to be a long speech because we have so much to talk about. When we talk about President Trump, we know how much he likes to have this forum. How long is long for the president?
We were talking about that today, right after President Trump gave those remarks during an event at the White House today. He said, buckle up. Basically, we got a lot to talk about. So Sung Min is right there. He said it's going to be a long one. That kind of depends how you define long. I have covered a lot of Trump rallies that certainly went into the 2-hour territory. But in general, we expect this to be about an hour to an hour and a half is kind of where it seems to land. I have some colleagues who are being a little bit more pessimistic in terms of when we'll be able to be wrapping up our coverage. And it could be shorter than that. But I would highly imagine that we are going to see the president go beyond an hour. And he gave us that warning today. So we'll see exactly what his characterization of that length means.
I think we are safe to say beyond 60 minutes for the president. We've seen him campaign too much. I know you've been on the campaign trail with him, so you know that firsthand. All right, Meg, thank you so much. I appreciate your time here as always. Enjoy the State of the Union and all your coverage there at the Associated Press.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, great conversation to preview on this, the eve of the State of the Union, the first for President Trump in the second term, as that first speech last year was really just a address of the joint session there of Congress. And you can tune in, as well as the American public, here on Live Now from Fox, starting Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for this State of the Union address. President Trump likely to hammer the economy, talking about that in full, but he might wade into the waters of what's to come in terms of the midterms. And we'll see what reaction we get from both the Democrats and the Republicans in terms of those tariffs, their popularity in question amongst voters out there as the Supreme Court struck them down. So I don't know exactly if that will be the biggest applause of the night. Also, potentially into foreign policy. So many conversations about Iran and what's going on there. Tensions continue to rise in that region. So plenty to talk about. And as we heard from Meg Kinnard there, you just never know. Some of these grand moments, these grand gestures might come about. Who might be in the audience, who may not. We do know that President Trump has invited the U.S. men's and women's hockey team on their double gold medal at the Milan Cortina Olympics. So Matthew Tkachuk, I believe, said he would be there. So we'll see what's coming of that. The New York Post here on social media saying that the women's hockey team declined the State of the Union invite after Olympic gold medal win. We'll still see who might be in the audience come tomorrow night there in Washington, D.C.